This is Mark Moneypenny. This is my Module 12 assignment. The definition of tort is an actionable or civil wrong committed by one person by another that is independent of contract, and if injury occurs as a result of the actions or school personnel, the liability charges may be imminent. Liability may result from a deliberate acts committed by another or acts of negligence. Tort law provides the opportunity for injured parties to bring charges when facts that the reputation was injured, or if based on negligence, there are grounds for liability charges, and there is no defense for failure to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm to a student at school. Intentional tort is an offense committed by an individual who intends to do harm to another person or understands that his or her actions may cause harm. An unintentional tort is a wrong perpetrated by someone who fails to exercise the degree of care in doing what is otherwise permissible. My first case was Sly versus the Board of Education. Richard Sly was a student in a fight with another two students before school started in the morning. The complaint was that the school failed to actually provide supervision outside the school before school started, and they knew there was a potentially dangerous situation going to happen. And the students who started the fights had reputations of being bullies and troublemakers. The verdict was the school was not found liable for neglect, while the acting in the government capacity was no unlawful nuance was shown. The reactive measures, at my school, we would take immediate action for what having supervision outside before school hours. We would take a deeper look into our anti-bullying program, making sure what is being taught. The anti-bullying program would need to reinforce the steps into dealing with people trying to instigate a fight, and what bystanders should do to actually be able to help if they actually see someone being bullied. Proactive measures, I would assign people to be outside school before school hours to make sure all the students are being supervised. And I would send notifications home informing parents of what time supervision at school will be present and not to have their students arrive before the said time. And I'd have discussions with the students about appropriate behavior before school. My professional ethics, it is the school's responsibility to ensure the safety of all students while on school grounds. The administration and faculty need to be aware of the potential discipline issues at the school at any time, and the school needs to be aware of potentially high-risk areas and then reinforce to the staff that they need to be observant of different behavioral issues that could take action anywhere in the school at any time. My second case was Johnson versus the School District of Millard County. This case was a first grader was injured in a music class. The teacher was teaching the game London Bridges, also with the music going on with it, and she had warned the kids not to act silly and not to yell, scream, or swing arms too much. And Robbie was accidentally released by two of the people swinging him, and he was thrown across the room into a bookcase, cutting his right above his head, right above his eyebrow, requiring 50 stitches. The verdict in the case was the teacher's simple instructions of first grader children how to play the game without direct supervision early on in the game was negligent upon the teacher. In awarding Johnson, you can see about $1,200 in medical expenses, $15,000 for permanent disfigurement, and $5,000 for pain and suffering. Reactive measures is my school would check into the injured student first and then notify the family immediately. We would gather all the information pertaining to the incident. Initially, the teacher would not be reprimanded or removed from the classroom. We would research the professional records of the teacher to see if there was any other indiscretions, and we would have frequent observations of the classroom setting to safeguard this, make sure the students are safe and they're not going to be injured anymore. Proactive measures, the importance of making sure each classroom is a safe setting for a particular subject is that being taught is crucial. Making sure teachers know that if the activity is not safe to do in the classroom due to the size of the classroom, they need to find an appropriate setting. They just basically need to do a judgment call on their, basically common sense on their end. If the activity is not age appropriate and definitely not suited for the classroom setting, they need to go on to a different activity. And my professional ethics, teaching a first grade class, the teacher should be closely supervising the class during the activities requiring the children to move around the room. And this incident required 50 stitches to a student that also claims he was asking for help from the teacher, and the teacher was unobservant to actually hear the student. And the teacher must pay close attention when planning activities, like I said before, and keeping the size of the room in mind, and also the age of the students as well. My third case is Mitchell versus Cedar Rapids Community School District. And the mother of the special education student sued the school for damages of a student after hours off-campus sexual assault. This student was rarely without directed adult supervision due to her diminished capacity, and in fact proven in trial, but with no record of specifically saying it was needed in her IEP. Not having permission, she did not have permission to leave the school, and a boy skipped class 6th period and they left the campus. The teacher had no recognition of calling the attendance office or asking other students or personnel regarding the absence. And this is something they normally did, especially with students that, with disabilities. If they were absent in a class, they would call and make sure and find out where they are. The verdict in this case was the school district was found negligent of not adequately supervising the special needs student and awarding $500,000 in damages and sharing 70% of fault to the teacher and 30% fault to the student. Reactive measures, my school would investigate on why the absence was not reported immediately. The teachers would be questioned on what they had responsibility of who had the responsibility of supervising the student, and questions any other students was skipping class before. We would ask if there had been any incidents of public displays of infection, because that was also another issue that was brought up in the case. And my proactive measures would make sure that there are policies in place for setting attendance at the beginning of each class period, and when dealing with a student with special needs being absent, it must be reported immediately, and they must be able to figure out where the student is, and have a schedule for supervision in the hallways during passing periods. Students should not just be able to wander off and outdoors with no one knowing where they're supposed to be. And any public displays of infection need to be stopped immediately and reported to the administration. Moving on to professional ethics, the staff with the responsibility of supervising a student with special needs needs to make sure they are aware of the student's location at all times during the school day. Having conversations with the student about appropriate behavior during the school day. And if the staff witnesses inappropriate behavior of a special needs student, they need to communicate with the parents regarding the behavior, and if the parents are aware of this behavior occurring. Case number 4 is Evans and Evans versus Oaks Mission Public Schools. In this case, I dealt with a high school student. Raymond Evans was injured during a physical education class when Raymond had suffered 2 shoulder separations during his second year in high school. The first occurred during a football game, a football practice, and he ended up playing in the very last game of the season. The second one happened in a pickup basketball game, and after the second shoulder separation, his parents asked for him not to play any sports for his junior year. Originally, he did not enroll in any PE classes. A few weeks later, in his junior year, he dropped out of a class and added a PE class. The parents were aware of the course change, and during the class, it was in a wrestling unit, and the student dislocated his shoulder once again. And the verdict was all claims against the individual, and teachers and coaches in the school district were dismissed with prejudice. And my reactive measures of this would be, first I would make sure check the student's condition to make sure they were okay, and I would immediately notify the parents. We would gather all the facts of what happened during the class. The teacher would not be immediately reprimanded or removed from the class. An investigation would occur on why the student who was not supposed to be participating in a PE class for the entire year was actually enrolled in a PE class. And the teacher would also be questioned on why the student who had a note from the doctor was actually participating in a PE class when they were not supposed to be. My proactive measures is when a student has a letter saying they should not be participating in sports for an extended period of time, in this case it's a year, they should not be placed in any physical education class under any circumstance, even if they drop a class and want to be placed in there. And if a student has a note saying they cannot participate in sports, they are not be participating in a physical education class and should not be allowed to participate until written confirmation is obtained from a doctor allowing them to participate. And I would also be conducting walkthroughs on a regular basis to ensure the safety of all students. Professional ethics, as a counselor, if the student has a written restrictions from the doctor not allowing them to do certain activities, then the counselor should under no circumstance violate the doctor's orders and actually place them in a class where they're not supposed to be. Even if it upsets the child and the parents, you're actually just following the letter of the law. And a teacher needs to honor written notifications from a doctor limiting the students from participation. I mean, the doctor's note is the law, and if anyone actually does get hurt, the teacher is liable. And if a student is in a particular class and not able to participate due to medical reasons, maybe it happened middle of the year, then the teacher is responsible for finding an alternate activity for the student to do. My case number 5 is Barnett versus Caldwell. And this is a high school student. Antoine Williams was tragically died after engaging in horseplay with another student while his teacher was out of the classroom. And nowhere in the faculty handbook does it actually define the word supervise or unsupervised. The principal explained that supervision means close proximity to the students when he was actually when he was examined. And the verdict was concluding that there was allegations of negligence, but involved in the duty to supervise students in the classroom. Her absence was discretionary and entitled to official immunity, so there was actually no charges brought upon the teacher or the school district. My reactive measures is the teacher would be immediately removed from the classroom. The superintendent's office would be notified of the situation immediately, and a meeting would be scheduled as soon as possible. I would notify the teachers union, making sure that they are present so the teacher actually has some legal representation, because I know how important that is for the teachers to be represented. The teachers will also be notified of always having be visually supervising their students at all times and not just in proximity. My proactive measures, policies would be in place regarding what is consider proper supervision of students. And if a teacher needs to leave the classroom for any reason, another adult should step in and monitor the students until the teacher returns. And if no adult can actually be found to step in, then that teacher is just going to have to stay in the classroom until they can actually find somebody. And when an adult hears horseplay at a school, they need to investigate and stop the behavior immediately. Even if it's not their class, they just happen to be walking by. If they hear something, they need to stop and investigate. Professional ethics. As a teacher, responsibility is to monitor the students in their classrooms at all times. And when a student behavior is not appropriate, the teacher has a responsibility to stop the behavior and make a record of the situation. And if the teacher is unsure of the consequence for such a behavior, then an administrator needs to be informed and go for their guidance on what the consequence should be.